Right, so here is the first of a series of short tutorials. Famous last words. We'll see how short these are going to be, but let's see if we can put together a couple of terrains, a couple of landscapes, mountain scenes, particularly something that will combine some of the new features, all of them actually, that we have in the new 3D Designer. And as you've seen in many cases, we start with the plasma noise, but there is one twist to that. We want to add some sort of a main feature going through it, such as a river or a canyon. And there are a couple of ways to do that, and certainly one way would be to simply paint it right in there, right? And I'm not talking about just painting it with maybe the regular or some sort of an airbrush like this and just go like this across it, and that will be a good start. You know, that certainly can serve the purpose of adding a little bit of darkness to that, which means that it's going to be lower elevation. Then if you reduce the opacity here, you can get your brush to do just a little bit of additional change in elevation here. Just scramble over that, right? And that in itself will also be, you know, one way to create a fairly usable terrain elevation map. The elevation map then is what we use when we go to transform. And in 3D Designer, bright parts are higher elevation and the dark parts are the lower elevation. Now, by default, it just uses the color of the object, which you can change. You can say, let's give it some sort of a brownish color. You can increase the light intensity. There's two light sources, in fact. You can have the altitude down lower and have it farther away, bring it brighter, add some shading or light soft shadows to that. So in the end, we're focusing right now on just the terrain, not so much how to render it, but the terrain itself, to to have this river going through here, or low valley, or whatever that is. You can adjust a little bit here, and the coloring of that also will be something we want to focus on. But first, let's just focus on the terrain itself, the elevation, right? The shape of it. Is it a mountain scene? Is it more like a Monument Valley, Grand Canyon style? So let's see some other ways that we could do that. We can certainly also add the image, the coloring from the image, and there you can see actually where the black turns into the lower valley, the lower parts, and the white turns into the highest elevation. So that's what we need to look for, right? As we carve our canyon here, how do we make it look somewhat random or usable or realistic? If there's like another little river going around here, maybe an island, and this whole thing is sort of a swampland. Think in elevation maps here, right? This is dark, it's going to be low. So you can have low elevation simply by making it dark. And you now have this little area here that we just carved out here, right? So the brighter it is, the higher the elevation. Now, there are some really fun ways to create some various types of designs with that, different types of terrains. I mean, you could basically go and write a message there, right? Something like, let's start again with a new plasma, something like this, and then I don't know, let's go and write, let's get a smaller, a little bit more on the opacity, and see if we can do something like this here. Write some sort of a message. Right? Can you read it? Well, we can go over that a few more times. Right, something like this. And there's the L. All right, and let's go store that quickly. We might need to go back to that. And so here's a quick look again at 3D Designer. And so here's your carved message inside the mountain range. So fun stuff. You can combine text and natural elements like a mountain scene there in some ways. Adjust a little bit that pre-filter to make it smoother or make it very detailed. All right, so now let's see what else we saw. We saw that we can combine this with some sort of a canyon going through it, and another way other than painting it, and if we were to paint it, I would actually use some of the brushes that we have here on the Browse Media. Some of these brushes here are pretty useful, the Grime Ripper, the Grime Seepage, because what you can do is you can make these a little bit less on the opacity, so it's not doing too much of that, but you can also change the mode to say make it darker, or a multiply mode or something like that. And so you might want to subtract. Let's see if we can do a subtractive. So as you keep going over it, it should essentially make it darker and darker. You could make a rub through around gray. There's a couple of different ways to get this this pattern to apply here, but there's probably also some post effect on here. I don't know if we have this particular brush might have some no, that's not it here. Settings. This one might have some post effects. Yep, that's what I thought. We have some translucent post effect here. Let's go turn that off. And then if we have simply a darkening or a smearing, we'll get some nice effects with that. So let's say if we set the mode to subtractive, you should just gradually turn it darker and darker. Maybe not fast enough though, so we might want to increase also left button, right button. Right, left button will go using the black color right now. It's not going to get any darker unless you actually make it instead of subtractive, if you make it multiply mode. There you go. That's gonna work. All right, so let's go use this one here and say we want to carve our canyon going through that, or even better, let's go use our initial 3D our render. There it is, plasma noise, and do something like this. And so let's say now we want to have a canyon going from the left to the right here, and we could go just kind of sporadically paint along that one brush stroke, and now use Shift A to paint again against that same brush stroke, but maybe change the size. And you need to keyboard focus here somewhere. Click it in the gray area on the sidebar there. And so you can do that a few times along the same brush stroke. But sometimes you really need to have a different path. So just go paint that as well. So that's another technique to create sort of a path that you want to carve into the general mountain range. There is also something to be said about the appearance itself will be very different if you change, for instance, with the curves filter here, if you change it to have more lower value dark or brighter ones like these, and then kind of suddenly peaking at the very top bright parts, or plateauing it, right? Like giving it a little bit of a plateau and actually kind of flat at the bottom too. So you could create something that looks a little bit more like Monument Valley types or Canyonlands. That would be actually a way to do that. Transform 3D Designer. Again, there you go. So you see now that looks a little bit more like some sort of a Canyonlands, Monument Valley type or Grand Canyon type display. Let's go and see what else we can do with that. So here is, oh, that's the wrong slider. There you go. So here's a view into that canyon, and you could use the Z-axis here to move in. Background color probably needs to change a bit. Let's say we want something like a bluish sky, not too much blue, a little bit whitish to that. And then we can add, perhaps change the perspective, and also add some depth, the fog with that, the depth fog, right? So it disappears right back there. Now that depth distribution is linear or non-linear depending on how much camera zoom you give to that. You might need to zoom back a little bit. And so here we go. That's a start for your canyon appearance there. There is another technique we saw in the River Canyon tutorial to carve that rather than painting it, that I really like to work on as well, and that's basically using two images in what we call a difference mode. And so to understand that technique, let's say for instance we do a gradient Where do we have the gradient? Here, right click on that, you can see linear gradient. We can also work the circular gradient. Let's do the circular gradient, something like this here, right? And then we'll go to the linear gradient, but we'll apply it in a different mode, right? Not in a replace mode like this. We want this one to be combined with the new one in a different mode, and in fact that different mode is the difference. We don't have that here for this particular tool though. So what we can do is actually have it in, for instance, the swap image. We can switch to the swap image and put it right there, and then switch back to the main image where we have that circular gradient. So we have those two now, and these two we can combine in different places. One way we could go to the filters here and say this combine with swap in a difference mode, right? And what you see now here is that there is a gradual transition to the lower value and then back up, and so the difference between the two gradients is what's represented here. You can actually see before and after. This is the way we have it here, and this is sort of the combination of the circular with the linear gradient in a difference mode. So what that seems to do is it finds a place where the two are the same and there is no difference, and when there is no difference you see it as black, zero, right? Zero color. And so that's the idea, is that we could possibly use that to actually carve out a canyon going, in this case he went circular, but you could do that also with some other techniques, so some other images. So let's start that, for instance, with the where is it, the render plasma noise. Let's start with that, perhaps relatively large features. Let's go something like this, click it 1 or 2 times until you have the way you want it. There you go, let's do that. and then switch to the linear gradient. There it is. And in the linear gradient, again, we don't have that difference mode, so we actually could have done that the other way. First do the linear gradient and then do this terrain. I'm going to store that terrain here, and I'm going to actually draw the linear gradient. Now in this case what I'm going to do is draw the linear gradient from left to right. Just to see that in a nice straight distribution from left to right. And now what I'd like to do is combine this image. Let's see if we can combine it. No, again, here we don't have that difference mode either. So we can actually do that in the render filter itself on the plasma noise. By default it's in opaque mode, but we do have a few more, and there is one here. That's the difference. So let's see what that does. The difference mode right here is finding an area where the linear gradient had the same value as the plasma noise, and the difference therefore is nil. There's no difference, so you see the black canyon there. Something similar here, so we must have had some fairly bright areas in the elevation map, because we also have fairly bright area dark areas, excuse me, because there was a fairly dark area there in the gradient as well. It went from left to right, dark to bright. So that's what that is, and with that you can explore a number of ways to create canyons that will go perhaps from left. If you want the canyon to mostly have a left to right direction, what I would do is use the linear gradient tool here, but in a top-down mode. Let's say something like this, or bottom up, doesn't matter. Somewhere at the top you have one extreme, the other one on the other side. You can in fact you don't have to be all the way at the edge of it. You can be even closer in and stop closer in, kind of a quarter into that picture. So you have a band here with gray, and you have a band with black and a band with white. In fact, let's go even closer to the center, from here to here. This is where the transition is, and so now we know that somewhere along inside this band is where our canyon is going to evolve as we render it like this, with the plasma noise going in difference mode, right? You want to make sure you don't put it in additive mode, you don't put it in subtract mode, you don't put it in multiply mode. But I mean, some of these can be very useful too if you want to have a flat land going into the mountain range, that kind of thing. So dark is low elevation, bright goes to the peaks in a high elevation. And there are some other things you can do here, but let's stay with this. Let's stay with the difference mode. And then you can try a few different variants. Clicking that smaller will make different types of patterns. Here with 7, you see a canyon that's very wiggly. That river has more detail, but what's interesting is that it still stays in that central band, and that's really the idea, is that we want to have a canyon or a river canyon that really stays in there. If you go all the way to the max, still same thing, but just less meandering, less detail. All right, so what I would recommend is you try that until you have sort of the shape roughly of the canyon that you're looking for. Rivers like these, fairly easy to generate. And in fact, you could turn this around and turn this into a lightning bolt, right? A lightning strike as well. Anyway, so that's enough for now. We'll use this. Let's store this image and just have a quick look at what that might look like if we go into the 3D designer. And there we go. Here is our first look at the canyon elevation map generated by combination of the plasma noise with a linear gradient that allows us to kind of control this seemingly random looking canyon or river going through that. Alright, so hopefully that will give you some things to try. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more tutorials on the next steps for this river canyon deep dive.